Okay, so have you ever like imagined yourself curled up by the fire?
Mm.
You've got like a spooky story in your hands, right?
Yeah.
But this isn't, just any ghost story.
Right.
We're talking like Henry James level.
Oh, wow.
The Turn of the Screw. Have you ever read that one?
I haven't actually.
So this is one of those books that like people call it psychological horror.
Okay.
And that's what we're gonna kind of unpack today, like what that actually means.
Interesting. What is psychological horror exactly?
Yeah, so it's not just about things going bump in the night, right?
Right.
It's about what's going on in the mind of the people in the story.
Oh, I see. So it's like the real horror is happening inside their heads.
Exactly. And James was like, really a master at this. And one of the things that makes the Turn of the Screw so creepy is, are you ready for this?
Yeah, hit me.
It's like a story within a story within a story.
Oh.
Wow. So we're hearing this whole thing from someone who heard it from someone else, and it all happened like decades ago.
Oh, wow. So right away you're like, why is the story even being told? What makes it so important after all this time?
Right. And then James drops us right into this creepy old house, right? It's called Bly. He calls it a castle of romance. But even from the beginning, something feels like off.
Oh, I bet. Like what kind of stuff?
Well, the governor, she's like the main character. She keeps mentioning these, like, sounds less natural.
Ooh, creepy.
Yeah. And she's always feeling like she's being watched, even though she's in this, like, supposedly beautiful house.
So he's playing with this contrast, right? Between like beauty and this hidden creepiness.
Exactly. And that's where things get really unsettling. Like, is she just imagining things? Or is something truly messed up happening at Bly?
Right, right. Because if the house is supposed to be so beautiful and everything.
Yeah. You start to question everything.
Exact.
And then, to make things even more complicated, you've got the children, Flora and Miles.
Okay, and who are they?
So they live at Bly. And at first, they seem like the perfect kids.
Like adorable and well-behaved?
Totally. But James, he uses that very perfection to freak you out.
Really? How so?
Well, he has the governess constantly talking about how angelic they are, how unnaturally good they behave.
I can see how that would be kind of suspicious. Like, no one's that perfect, right?
Exactly. It starts to feel like it's all an act, like they're hiding something.
Oh man, I'm already creeped out.
Right. And that's just the beginning. We haven't even gotten to the ghosts yet.
There are ghosts.
Oh, yeah. But James doesn't just throw them in for cheap scares.
Oh. So how does he use them?
That's what we're going to find out in the next part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
So we were talking about ghosts, right?
Right. Peter Quint and Miss Jessel.
Yeah, yeah. But here's the thing about James. He's sneaky about it. He doesn't, like, hit you over the head with ghosts, you know?
Oh, so it's not like a straight up haunted house story.
No, exactly. It's more like he gives you these glimpses, these hints, but you're never really sure if they're real or if the governess is just, like, losing it.
Oh, that's so much creepier. So she sees the ghosts, but we don't know if we can believe her.
Exactly. It's all about her perspective, right? Like, she describes Peter Quint, one of the ghosts, and let's see if I can find the quote. Okay, she says he has red hair, very red, close curling, and a pale face, long in shape, with straight good features and little, rather queer whiskers that are as red as his hair.
Okay, so she gives a pretty detailed description.
Right, but it's all filtered through her fear, through her growing obsession with these figures. So are they actually there, or are they figments of her imagination?
Oh, that's a good question. Does James ever actually tell us for sure?
That's the brilliant part. He doesn't. He leaves it totally open to interpretation. And that's what makes The Turn of the Screw so much more than just a ghost story. It becomes this psychological puzzle, right? You're constantly trying to figure out what's real, what's not, and whether you can even trust the governess who's telling the story.
Man, James was good. So we've got this creepy old house, a governess who might be losing her mind, and these ghosts that may or may not be real. What about the kids? How do they factor into all this?
That's where things get even more interesting.
Oh no, even more complicated.
Oh, yeah. So Flora, the little girl, she's like eerily calm throughout the whole thing.
Really? Even with the ghosts and everything?
Especially with the ghosts. Like, there's this one point where the governess confronts her about seeing Miss Jessel, the other ghost, and Flora just denies it, but she does it with this, like, grand manner, almost like she's, like, acting or something.
That's so creepy. So she's either lying or in denial or maybe like in on it somehow.
Right. And then there's Miles. He's the older brother, and his reactions are even more unsettling. He tells the governess that he was bad at school, but he refuses to say what he did.
Oh, that's not good.
And then there's this line that, like, always gives me chills. He asks the governess, "Think what I might do."
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's chilling.
Like, what does that even mean, right? It's like he's hinting at some dark secret, some kind of power that he has.
So now we have to wonder, are the kids just innocent victims caught up in this haunting? Or are they somehow, like, in on it? Are they being controlled by the ghosts, or are they the ones in control?
Right. It's like, on one hand, you got the governess who's convinced that these kids are in danger. But then on the other hand, they're acting so strangely that you can't help but wonder if she's the one who's actually putting them in harm's way.
It's like a twisted Scooby-Doo episode or something where you don't know who to trust.
Exactly. And as the story goes on, the governess's grip on reality starts to unravel, and the atmosphere at Bly just gets heavier and heavier.
It's like the house itself is closing in, right? Like it's a character in the story.
Absolutely. And that's where those Gothic elements that we talked about earlier really come into play.
Right, right. The feeling of being watched, the darkness closing in. It's like the whole story takes place in this oppressive, suffocating atmosphere that just keeps building and building.
Yeah, and it all leads up to these incredibly tense scenes, like the one where the governess sees Miles outside at night, and she's convinced he's talking to Quint's ghost.
And that scene in the schoolroom, right, when she thinks she sees Miss Jessel standing behind the kids, but then she blinks and the figure's gone.
Oh man, that scene is so creepy. And then, of course, there's Flora's illness.
What happens with that? Is it ever explained?
Well, it happens right after the governess confronts Flora about Miss Jessel.
Oh, wow. So is she really sick, or is it psychosomatic, or what?
It's never explicitly stated, but it definitely adds fuel to the governess's fire. You know, she becomes even more convinced that something sinister is going on and that she needs to protect the children, even from themselves.
But is she protecting them, or is she making everything a million times worse?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it all comes to a head in this final, devastating confrontation between the governess and Miles. It's like all the lights are off, right? And you're just like waiting for that final scare.
Yeah, and James doesn't disappoint. He really brings everything to a head in that last scene between the governess and Miles. The tension is like almost unbearable.
And what's so masterful about it is he does it all through suggestion, through the governess's own unraveling psyche. We're still stuck in her head, experiencing everything through her eyes.
Exactly. So we never get that external confirmation, It's all filtered through her fear, her paranoia, which of course makes it all the more terrifying.
So how does it actually play out, that final confrontation? I gotta know.
Well, the governess, she's utterly convinced that Miles is, like, possessed by Quint's ghost.
Oh, wow.
Right. So she confronts him, demanding that he, like, acknowledges the ghost's presence. She thinks that if she can just get Miles to say it out loud, to name the ghost, that he'll somehow be free from its grasp.
And what does Miles do?
Well, here's where things get even more ambiguous. Miles, he seems to crack under the pressure. He confesses to having stolen a letter from the governess earlier in the story.
Huh, interesting. But that seems, I don't know, kind of small compared to everything else that's been happening. Like, why is that the thing he confesses to?
Right, and that's the genius of James, right? He leaves it up to us to decide. Is Miles just confessing to a minor infraction because he's terrified and confused? Or is there something more to it? Is there a connection between the stolen letter and the haunting?
So we're left with even more questions, even in those final moments. Does Miles ever actually say Quint's name?
Well, sort of. The way James writes it is the governess is, like, really pressing Miles, demanding that he acknowledges the ghost. And finally, in this moment of, like, absolute desperation, Miles cries out, "Peter, Quint, you devil!"
Oh, wow. So he does see him.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Or maybe he's just saying what he thinks the governess wants to hear. The text itself is ambiguous. But what happens next is, well, it's heartbreaking. Right.
What happens?
Miles he collapses. He dies right there in the governess's arms. And the story ends with her saying, "I have you," referring to Miles, "but he has lost you forever," meaning she thinks she saved him from the ghost, but at what cost?
Oh, my gosh. So we don't know if the ghost was actually there, if it actually did anything to Miles, or if the governess's own fear, her own actions, somehow led to his death.
Exactly. And that's what makes The Turn of the Screw such a haunting and thought-provoking story. James doesn't give us easy answers. He forces us to confront the darkness, the ambiguity, the very nature of reality itself, and he leaves us with this lingering question. Are the real monsters the ones we can see, or the ones that lurk within our own minds?
Wow. So even though this story was written over 100 years ago, it still feels so relevant today, like it makes you think about how much our perceptions shape our reality, how our fears can consume us if we let them.
Absolutely. And I think that's why The Turn of the Screw continues to fascinate and terrify readers to this day. It's a story that stays with you long after you finish reading it, a story that makes you question everything you thought you knew about ghosts, about sanity, about the very nature of good and evil.
That is, I think, a perfect note to end our deep dive on. So to everyone listening, next time you're feeling brave enough to face the darkness, pick up a copy of The Turn of the Screw. But be warned, you might never look at a haunted house or your own reflection quite the same way again.